Dusk had a way of settling over the Carter ranch like a tired prayer, soft, gold, and forgiving, even when the people who lived beneath it weren't. The barn behind the house glowed faintly as the sun dipped low, its wooden ribs catching the last light like the bones of some old, wounded giant. Dust drifted through the air in slow spirals, moving as gently as breath, and if you listened close enough, you could swear the wind was carrying a song. Some stories ain't carved in stone, but in scars, and this one had been waiting a long time to speak. Inside that barn, on the farthest end where the lantern's reach grew thin, Mara Belcarter sat with her back to the wall, her fingers pressed to the cool dirt as though the earth itself might remember she belonged to it. She was large, big-boned, soft-bodied, a woman whose presence filled a room even when she tried her best to make herself vanish. But she wasn't loud. She wasn't wild. She wasn't wrong. She was just Mara, gentle, tender-hearted, and bruised in places that didn't show on skin. Her family called her a burden, a shame, something to be hidden away like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Silas Carter, her father, preached about pride on Sundays and chained his own daughter at night. Evangeline, her older sister with a tongue sharper than any knife in the drawer, fed gossip to the town with a smile that made people think she was gentle. Some folks are born simple, she would say. Best to keep her where she can't embarrass nobody. And the town nodded because it was easier than asking questions. But Mara wasn't simple. She was just lonely. Tonight the chain around her ankle lay cold, biting softly at her skin each time she shifted. It never needed to be locked. She never tried to leave. But Silas insisted. "So you don't wander off," he'd say, as though she were livestock with no sense of direction. Mara had learned long ago not to argue. When she did, the shouting shook her chest long after the doors slammed shut. She closed her eyes and hummed, low, trembling, soft as a candle flame. It was the only thing that kept her from splitting apart, something to stitch the quiet together. She imagined the mountains she had never seen but often dreamed of, their snow-caps catching sunlight like silver crowns. She whispered to herself, barely audible, one day, a promise so small it almost didn't survive the air. Far beyond the barn, in the town of Dry Creek, Jedediah Holt leaned his weight against the saloon's post and listened to the wind shift across the main street. Jed was a mountain man in the ways that mattered. Quiet, steady, built of thick muscle and secrets no one had earned the right to hear. He'd only come into town for supplies, bullets, flour, and the kind of solitude that followed him whether he wanted it or not. Folks respected him from a distance, the way animals respected storms. Near the well, two ranch hands whispered over their cards. "Carter family keeps odd habits, don't they?" Jed didn't mean to listen, but some words travel straight to a man's bones. "Heard they keep someone hidden," one man muttered. "Some girl, fat thing they say. Not right in the head." Jed's jaw tightened. He said nothing, didn't ask, but something old and instinctive stirred beneath his ribs, something that paid attention to injustices the world preferred to ignore. He left town before sundown, heading toward the foothills where the air felt clean and the ground didn't lie. But as he rode past the Carter property, he slowed. A lantern burned too long in the barn window. Shadows moved inside, and beneath the whisper of wind, he thought he heard something else. A sound small enough to break a man if he let it, like a sob swallow before it reached the throat. Jed kept riding, but the sound followed him, curling into the edges of his thoughts. After a few miles, he stopped, exhaling a breath that fogged the cooling air. He'd learned, over the years, that a man could ignore a lot of things if he tried hard enough. But the weight of a woman's pain wasn't one of them. Back in the barn, Evangeline pushed open the door with the toe of her boot, a tin plate in hand. "Here," she said, tossing a half-eaten biscuit and a few scraps onto the ground, as if feeding a stray. Mara kept her eyes down, not wanting to risk the sharp slap of a mocking smirk. "You'd best be grateful," Evangeline added. "Pa says you ought to pray we don't get tired of this arrangement." Mara nodded. It was easier. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the biscuit. Evangeline snorted. Pathetic. When the door closed again, Mara let the tears slip because there was no one there to see them. Or so she thought. Jed had turned his horse around. He moved through the dark like a man raised by it, boots making no sound as he neared the Carter barn. A horse stamped nervously in a nearby corral, sensing something unusual. Jed paused, listened. There it was again, the faint clink of metal. A shaky breath. A small, broken hum. He stepped closer. Inside, Mara shivered as night settled deeper, her chain clinking softly each time she shifted to keep the cold from sinking in. She thought she heard a footstep outside. Her heart thudded. Maybe it was Silas, drunk and angry again. Maybe he'd forgotten something. Maybe. The barn door creaked open. Cold night spilled in. The lantern flickered. Mara instinctively curled into herself. Jed stepped in slowly, careful not to startle her. His hat cast a shadow across his eyes, but the rest of his face was carved in a shape she'd never seen directed at her. Worry. Concern. Something fierce and protective flickering like a storm in the distance. He saw her. Saw the chain. Saw the bruised hope clinging to the edges of her expression. His breath left him in one hard exhale. Mara tried to speak, but the words snagged on shame. She turned her face away, wiping at her tears, even though she knew it was useless. Jed's voice came quiet, gravel-soft. "Who did this to you?" Mara shook her head, too frightened to answer, too conditioned to protect the ones who hurt her. Jed took one more step in, his gaze never leaving hers, the weight of the moment settling between them like a vow. And in that instant, silent, trembling, lantern glow flickering between two lives on the brink of change, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Jed knelt beside her without touching the chain at first, as if giving her one moment to breathe before the world shifted on its axis. Mara's eyes flicked to the shackle around her ankle, then back to him, confusion trembling through every line of her body. "You don't gotta be afraid of me," Jed said softly, voice barely rising above the lantern's flutter. "No," Mara whispered. "You should be afraid of them." The words fell out without her meaning to, shaped by years of fear, and once spoken, they hung in the air like truth finally tasting freedom. Jed looked at the metal cuff again, jaw tightening with quiet fury, the kind that didn't roar, didn't flare, but smoldered like coals waiting for the right wind. "That's so," he murmured. Before Mara could say another word, Jed wrapped his hands around the chain, braced his boot against the floor, and pulled. The iron groaned, strained, then snapped with a scream of metal that echoed through the barn like a vow made of thunder. Mara gasped. Not from fear. No, fear had lived with her so long it had worn itself thin. But from the sudden rush of possibility, so bright it almost hurt. Jed tossed the broken chain aside, and for a heartbeat they simply stared at each other, both of them trying to understand what had just shifted in the air. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." Mara hesitated. The open barn door looked too wide, too dangerous, like the world would swallow her whole if she stepped into it. But Jed's coat found her shoulders before her doubt could grow roots, the heavy wool warm with the scent of pine and wood smoke. She drew it close, feeling like she was borrowing strength. Her first step outside felt like stepping into someone else's life. The night air, sharp and cold, rushed into her lungs. Stars spilled across the sky in a scatter of silver. For the first time in years, nothing held her down. She trembled. Jed noticed. "Easy. I got you." He didn't touch her. He only walked close enough that she felt shielded, not owned. It was a new kind of safety, the kind built quietly, brick by brick. By morning, the ranch was in chaos. Silas Carter woke to find the chain broken and the barn empty. His roar shook the dishes in the kitchen. Evangeline went pale as chalk. "She's run off," Silas spat. "Or someone took her." But deep down, beneath his fury, was something darker. Someone had seen what he hid. Within the hour, Silas was mounted, riding toward town with wild eyes and half-truths ready to spill like poison. Jed led Mara along the foothills, keeping them beneath the jagged shadow of the mountains until the sun rose. She stopped often, partly from exhaustion, partly just to breathe air that didn't smell like fear. The world felt too big, too bright, too loud. At midday, Jed slowed his pace. "Not much farther," he said. "Cabin's just ahead." Mara didn't know what waited for her there. She only knew it wasn't a chain. Jed's cabin stood tucked between two towering pines, smoke rising from the chimney in a quiet welcome. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. The fire crackled softly, its glow painting the log walls in amber strokes. Jed poured tea into a tin cup and set it before her, stepping back as if afraid to intrude on a moment meant for her alone. Mara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat soak through her fingers. For the first time since childhood, she felt human. Seen. Not as shame. Not as burden. Just as Mara. "I ain't worth trouble like this," she whispered suddenly, voice splintering. Jed didn't argue. Didn't rush to fix the wound. He let the words sit in the space between them until they lost their shape, until silence softened their edges. Finally he said, "You ain't trouble. Folks who hurt you. That's the trouble." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, but Jed pretended not to see, giving her the dignity she'd been denied her whole life. They stayed in that fragile peace until the wind shifted outside, the distant rhythm of hooves carrying up the mountain. Jed stood, steady and calm, the way a man becomes when he's already decided what he'll die for. "They're coming," Mara whispered. "They can come," Jed answered. The riders crested the ridge, Silas at the front, Deputy Rowan Pike behind him, and a few ranch hands fanned out like a pack hungry for someone to blame. Silas didn't dismount. He yelled from his saddle, spit flying with every word. "Bring her out. That girl belongs to me." Mara flinched at the sound of his voice, her body folding in on itself like old habit. Jed stepped out onto the porch before she could stop him. "You're mistaken," Jed said, calm as a winter river. "She don't belong to nobody." Silas sneered. "You don't know what she is." "I know what she ain't," Jed replied. "She ain't livestock." Rowan Pike shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "Jed, Silas says the girl ain't right. Says she needs care. Is that what he told you?" Jed asked, voice low. Mara swallowed. Something inside her, small, trembling, but fierce, began to rise. She stepped out onto the porch beside Jed. She was shaking hard enough to rattle bones, but she stood there anyway. Jed's presence at her side steadied her like a hand she didn't need to hold. Silas gaped. "Girl, get back here. Right now." Mara lifted her chin, breath shuddering. "I wasn't wrong," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You just wanted me hidden." Rowan looked at the mark on her ankle, the raw imprint of the shackle. His face drained of color. Silas lurched forward, grabbing for his reins as if he'd charged straight at her. Jed stepped down from the porch with a calmness that felt like thunder waiting to strike. "If you take one step toward her," Jed said, "I'll put you in the dirt. And I won't need a bullet to do it." Silas snarled, pulling his gun. But Rowan was faster, shouting, "Silas Carter, that's enough." The ranch hands backed away, spooked by the fire in Mara's eyes more than the gunmetal in the air. Silas lunged anyway. He never reached her. Jed caught him mid-stride, the way a bear stops a branch from falling, pinning Silas to the ground with a strength born from purpose, not rage. Silas squirmed, spitting curses, but the fight had already gone out of him. The truth was on Mara's skin now, plain for all to see. Rowan dismounted, breath shaking. "Mara Bell Carter, you're free to go where you choose." Silas froze. Evangeline turned her horse around and galloped away, unable to face the collapse of her lies. Mara stood under the open sky, wind threading through her hair like a long-forgotten friend. Her chest ached, not with fear, but with a strange, overwhelming freedom she'd thought belonged to other people. Jed rose slowly, releasing Silas without another glance. He turned to Mara. "Where do you want to go now?" She didn't look at her father, didn't look at the shattered chain, didn't look back at the life that tried to swallow her whole. "Anywhere," she breathed, "as long as it ain't back there." Jed nodded, not claiming her, not directing her, just offering a path to walk beside him if she wanted it. As the afternoon sun bled into the horizon, they walked away from the ridge together, two silhouettes stitched into the vastness of a west that finally had room for her. And if you looked close, the earth itself seemed to sigh. Freedom don't always come with gunfire. Sometimes it arrives in the shape of a gentle voice breaking a quiet chain. And sometimes the heaviest shackles aren't made of iron at all, but of the lies we're taught to believe about ourselves, and the courage it takes to walk beyond them.